first started teaching, I felt like I never got to actually teach a lesson all the way because I was always addressing disruptive behaviors. My students were constantly out of their seats, they were talking over me or blurting out, they'd have sideline conversations, and they were just overall distracted by one another. Well, fast forward to a couple of years ago, I had an unexpected observation from my superintendent and the person from the state. They came in while my students were doing centers, and I had a small group at the back kidney table with me. During this time, the committee came in, they walked around, and my students were running centers without me while I sat at the back sipping my hot coffee, teaching small groups. My students even transitioned from one center to another during this time without me doing anything. Well, during that time afterwards, I got pulled by the superintendent and asked to then train new substitutes in our district on classroom management because they were very impressed with how my classroom ran after this situation. So today I'm going to be talking about how to get your students to run your classroom for you while you sit in the back and sip your coffee and work with students one-on-one. So with that being said, let's dive in. So the first system I had in place to have my classroom run on autopilot without me doing anything was to have clear classroom procedures and expectations. So classroom procedures, let's get clear on what that definition is first before we move forward. So classroom procedures are how you expect your students to interact throughout the room and with each other in the classroom. Some examples of this could be raising your hand, coming into the classroom, getting in line, using the restroom, grabbing a pencil, turning something in. All of these are different procedures you could have in a classroom. Well, then let's talk about how to teach them. You can teach them several ways, but what I found to be the most impactful is when I first started teaching, I would just tell my students how to do procedures, but I didn't actually model or teach them how to do expectations and procedures in class. So make sure you explicitly teach like you would content. So for me, this looks like getting up and physically modeling what it looks like and sounds like and having a discussion. Hey, what did you notice that it looked like and sounds like when I raise my hand for the teacher's attention? After you do that, you model the wrong way to do it and have a discussion on what it shouldn't look like and sound like. And then you have a discussion on why it should be the first way and why it's important to do it the first way. And then you have your students practice. You'll notice this really mimics the release model. And we're really applying that not only for teaching content, but for teaching classroom management. If you want some ideas on what this could look like in the classroom, make sure to check out my classroom procedure slides in my TPT store. In the description, I have a list of over 40 different procedures I teach in my classroom, and I have done for you slides that walk you through exactly how I personally teach these expectations in my class. So if you're wanting some inspiration on what this could look like for students, make sure to go check that out. So when you spend the first few weeks intentionally rehearsing this, they become habits. So your students don't have to think about it. They say it takes on average 21 days for something to become a habit. So those first few weeks of school, I'm really focused on these procedures and getting my students to naturally do them. So it becomes something like brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about it. They just do it. And this is where they automatically do what's expected of them without me having to say a word. And this is the major aspect of that, is leaning on and really being intentional about my classroom procedures. The second area that I highly recommend you work on if you want to automate your classroom and have your classroom run without you while you sip your coffee is to incorporate classroom transitions. So classroom transitions are the number one time of the school day where disruptive behavior occurs. This could be when students are pulling out materials, when students are transitioning from centers, when students come in the morning, when they get in line. All of these are different transitions that you have throughout your day. And my biggest tip for this is to treat transitions like you would procedures and routines. You'll notice in that list inside my classroom procedure slides that transitions are embedded as procedures in my classroom. And so I teach them the exact same way. I physically get up and model what it should look like and sound like. We have a discussion on what it should look like and sound like. I physically get up and show them what it shouldn't look like and sound like. We have a discussion on what it shouldn't look like and sound like. We have a discussion on why it's important to do it the right way, and then we practice. Now, here is where you can take it a step further and you can really automate things. You can pair your transitions with a song. So for example, when my students came in the mornings, I had a song that would play when students came in to unpack in the morning. When my students were supposed to pick up at the end of the day, another transition, I had a song that would play and we would practice that procedure and what they should be doing throughout the song and at what point should they be done packing up by the end of that song or a specific point in that song. Lining up. I didn't have to say it. There was a specific song dedicated to lining up. Coming to the carpet, specific song. Going back to your seat, specific song. So what I ended up doing is as I was teaching and modeling these procedures, I would model it with the song. I would get up when a certain part of the song played, and then I would, go and I would be done by a specific spot in that song. And then I would do it the wrong way, and then we would practice over and over again. Now, after you've taught procedures this way and you've paired it with a song, I then started embedding these into my daily slides so my students would transition from one activity to another without me saying anything. So let's say in the morning, after our morning tubs, we clean up and we come to the carpet. I would have a slide where I would just push play and the song would come on to clean up and come to the carpet. My kids would automatically clean up and come to the carpet because that specific song played. So going through classroom transitions and treating them like procedures, but also pairing them with music can really automate things because then you're getting your students to move throughout the room without you saying anything. The third strategy I use to automate my classroom so I could sip my coffee in the back while teaching students without having to run it was utilizing classroom jobs. So once you have expectations and jobs in place, you give students the classroom jobs so they can run the classroom without you. An example is earlier we talked about transitions. Well, once I had my expectations and my transition songs there, I would have a teacher helper, which was a job, start the timer for transitions, and then we would hit play whenever the timer went off and my students were supposed to transition from one center to another. All the while, I was teaching students at the kidney table one-on-one. I wasn't running the centers. My student teacher, my helper, was then in charge of pushing play and pause, and getting the students to transition. And if they needed to, they would have the students go back and do it again, just like we would in real life, or if I were to run it. So that's just one example of classroom jobs, but when you then give your students the autonomy of running the classroom and being responsible for their learning and giving them those classroom jobs, it really helps solidify automating the classroom without you having to do anything. If you want some examples of some classroom jobs I use in my classroom, make sure to check out my classroom jobs in my TPT store. I have a ton of jobs and ideas. Even if you just want them for inspiration on what this could look like in a practical sense of classroom, make sure to check that out. But essentially, classroom jobs make it possible for your students to run the classroom without you. And that's the whole point of automating your classroom, is to build a strong foundation with the expectations, get really crystal clear on preventing disruptive behavior with those transitions and automating them with music, and then getting your students to help run the classroom without you. So That wraps up everything in regards to how to automate your classroom so you can sit in the back, sip your coffee, and teach students in a small group setting without having to pause what you're doing and run the classroom. So the first strategy we talked about was to have clear classroom procedures and expectations, to practice them until they become habits and they're automatically what your students do without you having to remind them. The second thing is classroom transitions. We talked about pairing those with songs and how you can automate your students going from one activity to another simply by you playing a specific song and not having to say a word. Third thing is to rely on classroom jobs to help your students go about throughout their day. That way, when you're working one-on-one with the student, you're not having to pause what you're doing to then run the classroom. You have your students to help you with that so you can then meet the needs more fully and presently of that student in front of you. So that wraps up everything I have in regards of this week's content. If you want more tips on classroom management, couple things. First off, I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, leave a comment or review, so more content like this can reach more teachers who are looking for assistance in classroom management or classroom management strategies or inspiration. Second thing, make sure to tune in wherever you're tuning in from and go check out other weeks' content. I have covered over 20 weeks now on classroom management, so make sure to go check out past week's content and make sure to subscribe and follow wherever you're joining in from, because over the next few weeks I'm definitely going to be talking more about classroom management, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Third thing, if you want me to give you my top 10 recommendations for every teacher for classroom management, I took the top 10 most commonly asked questions I get asked when I coach teachers on classroom management. I answered them in a podcast and a YouTube video, and then I answered those 10 questions that I get about classroom management in a guide, and I linked to those podcasts and YouTube videos. So you can go check out my classroom management guide, go look for your question, see what the explanation is, and if you want a deeper understanding or a deeper explanation to my answer, you can then click on the video or click on the podcast episode to listen to a deeper understanding or a deeper explanation to how I run that in my classroom. So I like that this compiles my top 10 strategies and it's in one place. You're not having to sift through over hundreds of weeks of or 100 weeks worth of content now. It's all in one place for you to save your time. So definitely go check out that free guide. Third thing, if you want me to give you all my classroom management strategies and templates to save you time, you have a basis or a good foundation on the how-to strategies, but you want the done-for-you templates, make sure to check out my classroom management bundle. It has everything I use in my classroom for classroom management, everything from classroom procedure slides, classroom jobs, super improver walls, glow notes, everything in between. So make sure to go check that out, even if you're not necessarily wanting the exact resources I'm using in my classroom and you're just curious on what it looks like in my classroom and how I run it. Make sure to go check that out for inspiration on how maybe you can tweak a couple things and make it your own. The last and final thing is, if you want me to walk you through the entire strategy and the entire system of automating your classroom, everything from classroom management, family communication, grading, data collecting, lesson planning, organization, all of that, I'm a system guru. That's how I run my classroom, is I like looking for systems and making them better each year. So if you're wanting tips on how to strategically systematize your classroom, make sure to go check out the Present Teacher Circle. It is my program where I help new and first year teachers automate their classroom, everything, like I said, from classroom management all the way to planning and prepping several weeks out and ahead. So make sure to go check that out if you're wanting more help on classroom management, but also automating everything else that just comes with the job of being a teacher. So that wraps up everything. What was your favorite strategy that I shared today? Which one are you going to be using? Let me know. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye!